Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thanks for stopping by again. This is going to be a relatively short presentation, and one issue alone, and that is the elections, which are now over. And there'll be a couple of reasons I'll explain for why I raised it at all today. But in any event, it went very quietly. It was very well organized. Panama had difficulties in the last century with the military. We don't have a military anymore, but they got very sensitive about the way elections are held. And this is, so everything's very well ordered, and everybody knows their role, and they do it, I think, very well. I've officiated myself in elections and as what's called an election judge in the north in the United States, and I'm familiar with the process, and I certainly understand exactly what's going on, so to speak, and it's good. It's very good, very admirable. But they do a number of things that are a little unusual. In the past, there was a military in Panama. We don't have a military anymore. They rid themselves of that in the 1990s. But they have a national police. They're under the control of the President of the Republic. That control, however, is passed over to the Electoral Tribunal, which runs the election campaign prior to Election Day, so that no politician is in charge of the police when the election is held. It's tightly under the control of this tribunal, and every single step is planned out, and people are chosen, and all the parties are represented, and so forth, and what have you. Then alcohol is banned that weekend, although obviously people buy it early before the stores have stopped selling it, and tourists are taken care of in hotels, but it's still symbolic of the past. Don't want that getting involved either. The voting is done. It's quite open. They prepare results and they bring them into the capital city. Now, the Electoral Tribunal takes care of the campaign and the actual running of the election. But once that's over, the returns come into what's called the Scrutiny Board, and they they scrutinize the returns. They combine them, and only after all of them are in do they proclaim the winners. Now, by late Sunday evening, the race turned out to be closer than people expected, so it was actually quite late before we were really sure who had won. But in any event, we did know. And yet, there was no proclamation of a winner, because you don't proclaim a winner until you have every vote in. It's just the rule, okay? And we've had a very dry rainy season so far on this side, although thankfully we've had a little rain, but on this side of the country, in the Pacific. But on the Caribbean side, they've had plenty of rain. And over there's the indigenous area, the Ngami tribe, where they live, some of them, and they live in little tiny villages, some of them, at the end of long paths up through the jungle. I mean, it's really fascinating. But they don't see a lot of folks from outside too often. But there are schools for the kids, but still, they have to go quite a ways for that. Nonetheless, they do vote, and they're citizens, so they have to vote, be allowed the opportunity to vote. So the ballots and the ballot boxes and everything get taken up there for Election Day, and they did, and they voted, but they had heavy rain, downpours following that. And it just made it extremely difficult, even a little dangerous in some areas, to try to walk through with all the paraphernalia and all the votes and everything else. So they were stuck up there. This little tiny percentage of the vote had not been scrutinized, it hadn't arrived, and no one's being proclaimed. The idea is simple, that a citizen is a citizen, no matter how few they may be or where they live or whatever. And every vote gets counted before anybody proclaims a winner. And even if you know there's no way that enough votes are left for the person who's ahead to lose, it's not the point. You know, we're all in this together. We're all citizens. That's the point. So we all get to vote, and we don't announce a winner until all of us have been counted. And that's exactly what occurred. And this evening, or actually I think it was yesterday evening or this morning, that the folks from this very far out part of the country, the mountains, managed to make it down here to Panama City and presented the returns to the Scrutiny Board. And I didn't see it. I understand the televisions were there to greet them when they got in. And this evening, the proclamation, official proclamation, was made in public. And the candidate who was elected, his name is Laurentino Cortizo. It's Cortizo, Cortizo. His nickname is Nito, N-I-T-O, Nito Cortizo. Now, Nito's been around for a long time. He's very well known in politics for quite a while. He has had a very loyal group of supporters for a long time. He was a candidate once for his party's nomination back in 10 years ago and failed and did not win at that time, but this time did. And he has been elected president of the Republic. He's president-elect of the Republic, and he will be inaugurated along with his vice president on the 1st of July, as will everybody else who got elected. And there are, I think, 1,590 positions filled, and I can't remember how many candidates, but lots of them. So everything was elected. Everybody takes office at the same time. So that's what's happening now. We now have that done. President-elect Cortizo had his party and a second party that joined with them. They are sort of as a team. They have a majority of the members of the National Assembly, not a big one, but nonetheless a majority, which typically means here that we're going to have fairly smooth operations here in the first year or two. Generally speaking, as long as the president's got a majority there, that will stay intact. There will be a lot of consensus is involved in anything big that goes on in this country anyhow. So that will continue. But it means that we don't get tied up in a lot of arguments right off the bat. Those will come later. As time goes by, you know, sometimes these coalitions aren't quite so strong. But the leadership in the time I've been here has been very good about keeping things moving along and not everything coming to a complete screeching halt. We were slow under the last administration for a variety of reasons. Everything slowed down, and that was a problem. But it didn't stop at all. Now, so this is actually a good thing, basically. It allows Mr. Cortizo to move ahead and do what he has been talking about doing. Now, the reason I bring the whole thing up is to congratulate, of course, all of the people who got elected, and more power to them, but also because it's this time of the 5-year period, just after the election, where some websites that are usually run by expats, they're usually very small, they're usually directed to very small groups and so on, but they're there, can sometimes come up with the wildest stories. And I think it's basically because in order to keep people's attention to come in, they've got to have something exciting to say. So sometimes it's fairly mild. Even the major groups do it by trying to stamp our candidates or parties as right or left or center and everything else, which is just using the terminology in Europe or in North America here, when in fact it's not quite that way. The parties aren't that distinctly different that it's really appropriate, the big ones at least, to say this one is a right-wing party, this is a left-wing party. If you look at the actual activities of these different administrations, all three of the major parties have had terms since I've come. You don't see that huge a difference, certainly, ideologically among them. But you'll get that from outside. But the worst stuff is when they dream things up, or some of the smaller sites act as if they have special sources, and that this is a dark and mysterious country, and all sorts of things going on behind the scenes. And it attracts their viewers. And that's good for their advertising and so forth. But the simple fact of the matter is that it's pretty transparent. One thing, however, has gone on. I've gotten a couple emails on it. People saying, we understand that the retirement visa is going to be eliminated. What? No talk about that. I got one on the Friendly Nations visa, which is a very popular one, has dramatically changed. No, it's exactly the same as it has always been, and no big changes are expected. This sort of stuff, and it makes us, sometimes they make it sound like, oh, wow, this is really dramatic, this is really threatening and scary and everything else. Hold it, it's just bullshit, okay? Sorry, the language, but you get tired of it after a while, and you just call it what it is. Now, when there is, in the last year or two, there had been talk, has nothing to do with folks like you. The Nicaraguans and the Venezuelans who come in, we have so many who have come in as refugees from their countries, and Venezuela just continues its collapse. Nicaragua is not much better off. We have actually integrated these people into the country's economy quite successfully, and people have been a little irritated sometimes, definitely, but we don't get angry. We don't use violence. We don't scream and shout and all that sort of business. People have pretty much settled in, and it's worked well, but it's that if you're going to hear any mumbling and grumbling about visas and what have you, it's more likely to be aimed at other Latin Americans who are coming here because their countries are dysfunctional and collapsing. And everyone's really sympathetic to it, but after a while it does get grating. But this is nothing like what's going on in the U.S. and Europe. So, I mean, it's a very low level. So they may be playing off something like that. But the point is this, it worked. The democracy has worked. There have been some challenges brought up at some levels, various levels, because some elections are decided by just a few votes and all this business. Every one of them will be looked at and taken care of. There's nothing unusual has gone on. It went well. And now all we have to do is get it together in the next 6 weeks for the inauguration, and then see the new government in action. And we'll be talking about that in times to come. So that's all for elections in Panama. And I look forward to getting back to the rather dull, simple things like real estate. Thank you for stopping by. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. I'm supposed to say that every time. I always forget. And ring the bell so you get an immediate notification. God, this YouTube thing. Thanks.